I'm A.T. Greenblatt. Thank you so much for coming to my reading. I am going to pretend this is live and just read the story and see how it goes and pretend I'm not recording this at all. So we'll see how it goes. Alright, so I'm going to read you a story called The Family in the Adit, which was published in Nightmare magazine back in April. And I think I have enough time to read the whole thing. So yeah, let's do this. The Family in the Adit. My reasons were selfish, but I hoped the dinner guest would succeed. She had made an effort to be presentable, even though that only amounted to plaiting her hair into a few coarse braids and shaking some of the filth from her clothes before she stepped out of a lightless passageway and into her home. But small actions carry great weight in the mind. Husband didn't agree. "You won't survive this," he said. "I can tell." The dinner guest's determined expression didn't waver, but her scabbed, scraped knuckles tightened around the sackcloth bag in her hand. Unfortunately, husband had a point. Even I could see the dinner guest was a shell of the person she once was. Her face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under her eyes, and a few festering scratches on her cheek. She had washed, but couldn't wash away desperation. "Are you Herbert Howard?" she asked. "The guard with the way out?" "Who else?" husband replied, seeping with resentment. But the dinner guest stood her ground. "Thank you for hosting me for dinner," she said, as if she'd been invited in, as if she hadn't fought her way out in mind, pushed through the door, and stepped into this old, narrow house in the attic. "You have a lovely family." On the living room sofa, the three children stared at her with blank expressions. "Wine?" I asked, and pushed a glass into her hand before she lost her nerve. This stalled her, as if I had been holding a knife instead of crystal. The red liquor was sloshed. She held it slightly away. Didn't taste it. The wine wasn't poisoned, though. I believe all dinner guests should have a chance to enter a home and let their eyes adjust to the light. Though our lamps flickered terribly and the fabric colors were muted by time, our guests should be able to look at the sateen furniture, the hand-painted dishes, and the silver that was only slightly tarnished. Look at us, the family in the attic. They should have the opportunity to turn back. "You barged into my home," husband said through clenched teeth, "and refused my hospitality?" The dinner guest hesitated only for a moment. "I would love to join you for dinner," she said, and took a sip of wine. I smiled, and she noticed. "My name's Melody," she said. "And you?" "She doesn't have a name," husband said, glaring in my direction, and I recoiled. "We all have our roles." "I'm the wife," I whispered. I've always been a terrible cook. Our meal started with turnip soup, laced with arsenic, and tossed salad. Husband doesn't like feeding the guests past the first course. The dinner guests looked around the table, watching husband and the children systematically devour the murky soup. She couldn't have known the soup was poison or that the arsenic had no effect on the family. But she suspected. Her stomach rumbled while we ate. But I'm not a heartless monster. Eventually, she noticed how my soup spoon remained in place, but my salad fork did not. Husband noticed too. "Mind scum," he said, "always shoving into my house, making demands. We are the type of family who does not like to be disturbed." This wasn't quite true. It wasn't a pleasure to entertain guests, but it did offer a welcome distraction. A bit of hope. "I'm sorry to impose," the dinner guest replied, though her posture said she apologized for nothing. Then she tore into her salad, though the greens were wilted and sour. She probably hadn't eaten anything resembling fresh fruit in months. "They say you have a way out of the mind," she said, with a full mouth. "I do," Husband said, but I'm not giving it to you. You've only been in mine for what? 2 months? 3? 6. Pathetic. You probably have fingers that haven't been broken from digging. You probably still have friends in mine. You can't know how monstrous the taskmaster really is yet. Around the table the family went still. It never ended well when husband brought up the taskmaster. The children put down their soup spoons and picked up the steak knives in unison. I know what sacrifice is, the nigger said quietly. That was when husband pulled off his face. She hadn't noticed the seams around his scalp or at the base of his chin. My computer was making noise. Still recording. Sorry. She hadn't noticed the seams around his scalp at the base of his chin. She didn't notice the parts of him that were flesh and the parts of him that weren't. But underneath husband's mask were cogs and bleeding flesh and dead tissues and pins and screws holding this creature that could eat arsenic in his soup every night. Husband smiled his greediest smile. The dinner guest shoved back from the table, stumbling to her feet as her chair banged against the floor, hand over her mouth to stop herself from heaving. She hurried from the room into the kitchen. I moved to follow her, but husband turned his uncovered face towards me. Stay, he said, and I did. I was a terrible wife, but I learned it was better not to disobey his commands. I listened to the crashes, the rattle of the locked door in the back of the kitchen, as the dinner guest fought furtively with the knob. I watched the children put down their knives as the blank, shiny faces became a mirror of husband's raw visage. They were good mimics, the children, these perfectly hard creations that were seldom heard but always seen. When the dinner guest returned, she was paler than before, but composed. You can't know anything about sacrifice, husband said, speaking slowly, with relish, so we could hear each pop and click of his uncovered jaw. You're still whole. He didn't notice what the dinner guest brought back from the kitchen until the butcher knife caught the dim light. In one swift, determined stroke, she brought the blade down past the second knuckle on her left ring finger. The digit parted easily from her hand. Not anymore, she gasped. I didn't need to poison the fish course. Even in death, the barbed fang mine was vicious enough. We waited for the dinner guest to stop bleeding. There was a large wet spot around her plate as she clutched a napkin to her maimed hand. But there would be no stain to remove. The tablecloth was already red. The dinner guest swayed in her seat but stayed upright. Serve the damn fish, she said through clenched teeth. With the same butcher's knife she used, I severed the head and tail and cut the eel's long body into 6 equal pieces. I served husband first, then the guest, then the children, then myself. The fish looked like sewage and stank like a forgotten corpse. The dinner guest gagged. You understand that if you don't eat, I will kill you, husband said. Yes, she whispered and picked up a fork. We ate carefully. The mine-eaters were spiteful creatures. Their bones liked to catch on our throats and cling. There were sacks of venom randomly scattered throughout the bodies like traps, and the barbs were obstacles, sharp, cruel, and deep. Even after years of practice, I never learned how to eat a mine-eater without pain. Which is probably why husband loved him so. Mine scum, he said, as the eel bones crunched between his teeth. Did I tell you how I became what I am? The dinner guest did not reply. She was struggling to swallow the minuscule piece of the eel in her mouth. Husband smirked. I was here when the mine was a shallow cut in the mountain. The taskmaster only had 1 whip back then. I was the first to sign my name on the books, the first to dig, the first to know the tunnels like my own lifelines. I dreamed of veins of copper in the night, and I'd dig like a madman in the morning. We were so close. I could smell it. I could taste Eureka. Didn't even notice how far we turned down until I couldn't get out. Couldn't? Or didn't want to? The dinner guest asked. My husband snapped the ears vertebrae. Don't interrupt. I've been stuck in this attic for decades, and you know why? Because I begged the taskmaster to let me go back to my family, and that bitch laughed at me. He began to puncture the ears of Adam's sack with his fork, splattering the contents. I winced. It would be a terrible mess to clean up later. I tried to escape, but the taskmaster knew me too well. I told her I just wanted to go home, but she laughed and said, That ain't what you want, Herbie. Not really. She made an example out of me. She pulled me apart while everyone watched and remembered. There's a reason why you know my name, mine scum. Husband pointed an accusing finger at the dinner guest, but there was pride in his voice too. Later, much later, when we were alone, she put me back together, and you know what she said to me? You done good work, Herbie. Consider this a promotion. Husband slammed his hands down on the table and we all jumped. That bitch thinks this is a promotion. A neglected house, stupid kids, and a useless wife. My hand tightened around my fish knife, and almost dead anger rose up in my throat. But I swallowed it back down with a piece of barbed fish. And, husband continued, these pathetic weaklings keep coming to my dinners, always begging me for a key out. So why don't you leave? The dinner guest asked. Same reason as you, mine scum. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Everyone dreams of riches in the mind. Eureka waiting patiently on her tongue. Even me. The dinner guest stared, and husband laughed. And husband's laugh was full of barbs, too. Don't look so surprised. You're nothing special down here. Husband leaned back and spat the last of the Hermione's bones on the tablecloth. We all have our roles here. So tell me, he said, why should you get off easy? I have 3 children I left behind. So? Riches aren't everything, I said. Did you dream of rubies? Salt, the guest replied, startled, turning to me. Enough salt to preserve food for generations. Husband turned to look at me too, and his glare was poisonous. I would pay for this infraction later. But it was worth it. The dinner guest took full advantage of the momentary distraction and changed strategies. I was told that for a key, I need to bring a main course, she said. And what could you possibly have that's fitting for my table, he sneered. The dinner guest bent down to retrieve the sackcloth bag she brought with her from the mine. With one smooth motion, she reached in and pulled out the taskmaster's severed head. She tossed it on the table, and it rolled to a stop in front of husband. Slowly, his skinless face stretched itself into a smile. I did my research, she said. It had been a long time since we had a dinner guest with us for the main course. Usually, they died over the soup, or choked on a bone, or had the skulls bashed in by husband when he grew angry or bored. With shaking hands, I arranged the taskmaster's head on a platter and placed it at the center of the table. But that was not what we ate. What's this? The dinner guest asked me as I placed the plate of browned meat in front of her. A few dinner guests that didn't make it as far as you did, husband replied, eyes bright. Tell me, mine scum, will you eat your fellows? The dinner guest hesitated. Then she cut a generous piece with a steak knife and slowly, deliberately, lifted a fork to her lips. How do you think I made it this far? She said, chewing. Husband grinned. I'm not going to just give you my key. How about a business deal then, she said. You don't have anything left to trade. No, but I can't help you with that dream of yours. All that copper. I have some pull on the outside world. I could recruit 100 more men and women to come here. That's 100 more people working in the mines. Think of the progress. You'd add 100 more people to the hundreds of people already trapped down below? I asked. She met my gaze. Weren't you? For a way out? I didn't reply. I knew my life in the attic was better than in the mine. Food was delivered regularly from somewhere down below, and I didn't have the taskmaster breathing down my neck. Best of all, in the summer hours, a little sunlight slipped in through the bottom of the door in the kitchen for 10 minutes or so. It was remarkable how little a person needs to survive. Hopes and dreams, after all, was what kept our minds full. Ignore my wife, husband said. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Let's discuss details. Husband and the dinner guests debated her plan for almost an hour. I refilled the wine glasses twice, spilling both times from nerves, but they didn't notice. She argued hard for her freedom, even when the children became cruel and adopted the face of her children, the ones she left behind. During the lulls in conversation, they asked her to come home in high, sweet voices. The dinner guests ground their teeth and refused to look at them as she pressed on. Eventually, husband laughed and slapped his hands down against the table. He stood up and removed his jacket, then his shirt. He took off his chest piece and exposed the ugliness within. Rusty gears and splintered bones and black organs. One by one he hooked his fingers into his ribcage, and with the strength only he could manage, pulled his chest open. From within the cavity he snapped off the key made from bones. It was a small and brittle thing that would open the door in the kitchen, but would break in the lock. The dinner guest's fork clattered on her plate. Slowly, with pride, the husband walked around the table with his ribcage splayed wide, and placed the bone key in front of her. Thank you, she breathed. Except, he said with a smirk, there's one more thing. And that was when the dinner guest rammed the steak knife through her husband's heart. His eyes widened in surprise. Then he slumped over the table and sent the silverware and glasses and plates scattering. Finally, she gasped, looking up at me. He shut up. For the moment, I replied, But you can't kill him. I've tried. The dinner guest blinked in surprise. She opened her mouth, but I never found out what words matched her shocked expression, because a moment later, she crumpled to the floor. I didn't lie. The wine wasn't poisoned, just drugged. The dinner guest was breathing deeply on the faded rug, and I knew what she dreamed of. I hope her palace was full of salt. I hope her palace of salt was beautiful and vast, where Eureka echoed endlessly. It would be the last good dream she had for a while. Living with her husband was like living on a knife's edge. He perfectly suited his role as a god. His violent moods and his resentments never changed. But the wives did. I picked up the bone key and cradled it to my chest. Across the table, the children stared at me, but their faces remained blank. They passed no judgment. I'm sorry, I said to the dinner guest. You haven't served your time yet. I believe she did have children in the outside world, but I didn't believe they were the reason she wanted to leave. No one came to mind or left it for anyone but themselves. Me, I once dreamed of forgotten cities, and the fame of discovering them in the belly of the mind. Foolish, maybe, but at night, I still dreamed of splendid ruins. The dinner guest was clever, but she hadn't been in the mine long enough to learn that cutting off the head of the taskmaster or killing husband offered a brief respite, but did not last. In the mines, the roles didn't change. Only a few players did. And the family in the attic was almost as old as the mine itself. I kissed the top of the wife's head and wished her luck. Years ago, I had been a dinner guest, and the man who was wife before me laced the meat. Key in hand, I ran to the door and placed it in the lock and turned until the bones snapped. When the knob moved under my hand, I almost wept. I had to throw my weight against the door for it to relent. Just a little. Just enough for me to slip out. Before it locked behind me again. I left without looking back. Because for the first time in years, I saw more than a sliver of sunlight. But I'm not a heartless monster. For the wife's sake, I hope the next dinner gets succeeds soon. And that's what I got. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to read it, it's available at Nightmare in the April issue. And I should have warned you guys that it's a scary story, but so it goes. Thank you all so much for coming to my reading and listening, and hopefully I'll see you at the con.